This is CNN Breaking News.
I'm going to take a break from the trial of Officer Derek Chauvin to bring you other important breaking news from a nearby suburb. CNN has now learned the former Brooklyn Center, Minnesota police officer Kim Potter is being charged in the killing of Daunte Wright. Our CNN correspondent Adrian Broaddus is live from Brooklyn Center. Adrian, walk us through what we know.
Well, John, we know the Washington County prosecutor has told CNN he will charge that officer, Kim Potter, with second-degree manslaughter. Here in Minnesota, under the state statute, if someone is convicted of second-degree manslaughter, the penalty is no more than 10 years or a fine up to $20,000. For those of you who may just be tuning in, Potter is the officer who was once here with the Brooklyn Center Police Department for 26 years. She fired the shot that ended the life of 20-year-old Daunte Wright. The former police chief here in Brooklyn Center told us she did not mean to fire that shot. She pulled her gun out instead of her taser. On that body cam video that was released soon after the incident occurred, you could hear the officer saying to Mr. Wright in the car, "I'm going to tase you, I'm going to tase you." And then that was followed by taser, taser, taser. And yelling taser, taser, taser is what officers are supposed to do before they deploy their taser. But that did not happen. The family of Daunte Wright has said they have a hard time accepting what happened to their son on Sunday was an accident. So again, breaking news at this hour, the Washington County Attorney tells CNN he has filed second-degree manslaughter charges against Potter. Now, you may remember Officer Muhammad Noor was also charged with second-degree manslaughter. He was convicted in the case of Justine Damon. And right now, just 10 miles away from where I am, Officer Derek Chauvin is on trial for the death of George Floyd. Chauvin was charged with second-degree manslaughter as well as second and third-degree murder. John?
Adrian Broaddus for us live on the scene. We'll continue to get reaction as this plays out today, and let's get some important insights now from Laura Coates, the former federal prosecutor and our CNN legal analyst, and Cedric Alexander. He was the former president of the Black Law Enforcement Officers Association. Laura, let's start with you. It's a quick movement by the prosecutor. What do you make of this charge, second-degree manslaughter?
Well, based on what we learned from the now attempted to be resigned chief, this idea of accidental, this notion here is saying that culpable negligence is going to be the standard here. Now, what does that mean, culpable negligence? It means that you were grossly negligent and reckless in your behavior. You created an unreasonable risk that would lead to death or bodily harm. And so you've got this 10-year penalty as a ceiling of it. But on that notion, this is very early on in the prosecution's case now. It could be graduated to a higher charge. There is always a chance it could be reduced. I don't see how it would be reduced, but it always could go up. Remember, Adrian just spoke about one of the officers in the past, Muhammad Noor, charged with one crime and added on the third degree. Same thing with Derek Chauvin. But it's all about whether or not this prosecution is going to be able to prove that this officer created an unreasonable risk, that you reached for believing it was a taser and accidentally, purportedly got your gun. Was that reasonable for you to make that mistake? Was it reasonable for the period of time that you held the service weapon in your arm not to know that it was actually a taser? Was it reasonable as well to even fire and deploy the taser, believing, of course, was a taser, and ultimately being the gun? All of this goes under that same umbrella, and interestingly enough, it tracks what's happening with Derek Chauvin right now, because it's one of the charges he's now facing. But again, culpable negligence, John, is gross negligence with recklessness, and that is going to be the key to solving this particular indictment and having a conviction.
And Cedric, we've talked about the issue of police training, especially for veteran officers throughout the Chauvin trial. Now in this case, former Officer Potter, she resigned yesterday, a 26-year veteran of the force. These are dicey situations, but the argument put forward by the now resigned police chief was this was an accident. Walk us through how an officer has a handgun and a taser and how they're supposed to understand and how they're trained to have that key distinction.
Well, certainly she's been around long enough and been there since the inception of tasers when they were introduced. a number of years ago, assumingly there at their department as well. So there's a rigor of training that you go through from weak side to strong side, where your service weapon is always on your strong side. What occurred here in this case is very difficult and hard to understand for the common layperson, and certainly for many police officers it's hard to understand. Can it happen? Can it be an accident? Maybe it can under certain stressful situations, but the question becomes, is that why was a service revolver, a service weapon pulled? And in addition to that, why would it even be necessary to deploy a taser as well? So those are going to become the questions. I'm certainly going to be interested in how this case is going to evolve in listening to, at some point, the argument on the part of that officer and what was going through her mind, what was she experiencing. But for someone that's a 26-year veteran, and for this to occur, and however it occurred, you had someone to lose their life unnecessarily, and that becomes a real issue because there's a real gross negligence here that has taken place. So it'll have its day in court, but again, she'll have her day in court, yes, but not the person who lost their life.
Right, 20-year-old Daunte Wright, a parent. 20-year-old Daunte Wright is the person who lost his life in this episode. And Laura, walk through a little bit more what you just discussed, because I think it's important how cases can evolve. Obviously, because of the unrest in the community, because of the history in the community, and perhaps even because of the proximity to Minneapolis. And we know the Chauvin trial is underway just 10 miles away. The prosecutors clearly made a decision here to act quickly to make clear that they were going to bring charges. But as you note, the investigation will continue and that can evolve. Walk through how that process works.
Well, when you first become aware of an actual charge or an arrest of somebody, prosecutors routinely will make a decision about the nature of the arrest and whether it fits with a particular crime, whether they can satisfy those elements. But it is not exhaustive. We're only 2 days after, unfortunately, the killing of young Daunte Wright. And so this might be the floor for the charges against this particular officer and not the ceiling. And oftentimes, as you develop the case, as you learn more information, you might increase those particular charges. One way of doing so is if you learn additional information about the statements of the officer, about the state of mind, whether this was actually an accident. All we have to go by right now is that police chief who made the comment that he believed it was accidental. And we have the video where the officer says, "Oh, expletive, I shot him." Well, that statement perhaps could be interpreted as her believing that she made a mistake, or it could be the realization that it actually had happened, or the statement of taser, taser, taser could undercut any statement that it's intentional. And so all of this is going to be weighed right now. But remember, this is also an opportunity for officers and the defense counsel, for any defendant potentially, to talk about pleas. Because the longer and further into an investigation you get, the less likely you are to get a favorable plea offer. You want to get it close in time. Now, I'm not advocating for her to be able to plead out, but this is a reality in all cases that prosecutors bring. But remember, one thing interesting in Minnesota, John, that needs to be talked about in terms of police accountability is what are the consequences? You have a 10-year penalty maximum sentence and or a fine. It might not even get to that if she's convicted of that particular crime. It might be a lesser prison sentence, if at all. But then what about things like a pension? Most officers in different jurisdictions may contemplate whether to resign or be fired and think about the consequences of, say, a conviction. Well, Minnesota is unique in many ways, and one of the ways they have been unique is that they do not have a garnishment or a forfeiture of pensions for police officers, even in the event of a conviction. And so that might factor into why you choose to resign or otherwise. And this may be something that will come up later on. It might be one of the reasons why the mayor is reluctant to accept the resignation of the officer. But again, this is tracking in a very eerie way the Derek Chauvin trial, because jurors right now in that same county are trying to grapple with a charge of second-degree manslaughter, whether Derek Chauvin created an unreasonable risk that caused the death of George Floyd. Same question now being asked of now resigned Kim Potter against what happened.